We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and it's gonna take more than a poke in the ribs to put down this old dog. Welcome to Best of the Rest. That was a horrible impression. The show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Slasher Month, and this week we are talking the 2001 film Jason X. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my hockey mask wearing co-host, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am. It has been not too long. I've rewatched this one a decent number of times over the years, but excited to talk about it here.
Yeah, your voice, it sounded really clear for wearing a hockey mask all the time. You're coming through very nicely on the microphone.
Thank you.
Good job. Let's see, I did not see this movie in theaters. I actually didn't see it for the first time until fairly recently. I did a deep dive on the Friday the 13th movies, but I have seen it a couple times since then. It's one that I've gone back and rewatched. I get the hashtag positivity podcast out there early. I think it's pretty fun. I have a good time with this movie, but there's really no denying that it definitely falls into that poorly received category.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely probably didn't see this in theaters as well. This would have been 2002, so I don't think my parents were taking 15-year-old Andrew to go watch Jason movies at the theater just yet. But yeah, it's definitely one that is not particularly hyped up as being in the upper echelons of the franchise. I don't know if it's necessarily seen as the low mark of the franchise either, to the film's credit. But yeah, not too many people talking about this one in a good way. Until today.
Till today. Our theme this month for Spooky Month, for October, is slasher films. And when it comes time to dissect what is a poorly received slasher movie, what's a quote-unquote bad slasher and a good slasher, it's kind of a fuzzy line. Even some of the best ones aren't well received by critics. There's how many movies are in the Friday the 13th franchise? 11, counting Freddy vs. Jason. None of them are certified fresh. Not even the first one. Not even none of them are quote unquote good movies. But even within the fandom, you've got the discussions about which one's at the top, which at the bottom, what's better, or what have you. But even then, it's not very consistent. Like I very much like this franchise. I watched all of these movies. I had seen parts and bits and some before, but either beginning of this year, early last year, I had to quarantine for a bit because of COVID in my house. So I was just locked up in this office that I'm recording in right now for like 5 days, and I watched the entire franchise. I just binged it, and I've got my thoughts on which ones I think are high up. Like I think Part 5 is one of my favorites in the series. I think it's really good, but there's people that would put that dead last because of some of the decisions that it makes. And I don't know. I don't really know how to, what do you think of like a good, well-received slasher movie? Like the original Halloween, I guess, is the first one we go to. But
the original Halloween
it's only getting that
probably
credit because it's a trailblazer and not necessarily because it's so much better than the other ones.
First off, Chris, watch yourself. Watch yourself. You are treading on some very thin ice there. Halloween gets hyped up a lot, even going back to something like, say, Psycho. If you're looking at slashers, I know that one's kind of seen by many as kind of the prototype of things that would follow as far as, obsessive males, and final girl situations. More recently, obviously, I think the original Scream is probably one of your easy go-tos as far as well-received slasher. The original Nightmare on Elm Street, I feel like, is pretty well-received, generally speaking. I don't remember its score off the top of my head, but as you're saying, these are all really kind of exceptions. Like Scream is actually a fairly rare franchise in that most of its installments are quote unquote fresh. I think there's only one, maybe one that's actually like rotten. And it's not by that much, I don't think. With something like you said, Friday the 13th, they're all rotten. Like, even the good ones were not, the quote unquote good ones were not well received by critics. And Nightmare on Elm Street is no exception. Halloween, obviously, no exception. Like, Halloween's got this, mammoth monolith of a first installment that arguably creates the genre that follows. And it's still got tons of sequels that are just pretty boilerplate standard fare. A lot of the stuff that made the original unique just gone because they turn into these franchises where it's like, get one out every year, get us another Halloween, get us another Friday. And I mean, you even start looking at more recent franchises like Saw, stuff like that, where it just became a yearly installment where when you're making movies that fast, it's very difficult to have any kind of through line of quality, or it becomes difficult because when you're just basically turning these things into like a machine churning one out every year, it gets tough to really get too invested in that. Scream is the one where it kind of starts taking its time between installments, and I think it's better for it. But yeah, I could talk about slashers all day. There's a whole examination of that genre that could be done, but that's not what we're here for.
No, it's not. But whenever it came time to choose the episodes, choose the movies we're covering this month, we wanted, it's Friday the 13th. We have to dive into this franchise. It's so synonymous with the slasher genre. But I feel like we had to pick movies that stuck in people's minds in one way or another. Because I have a feeling for most people, if I said, hey, we're doing Friday the 13th part 6 or part 3 or part 4 or part 7, you would have to think for a minute, like, oh, well, which one even is that, right? Because they all kind of run together. But I think a few of them in the franchise kind of stand out. Like, I think Jason Takes Manhattan, which a lot of people think is like the first time that series, well, probably not the first time, but one of the times the series jumped the shark and kind of did something different than just killing campers. That one kind of stands out. But I think ultimately we had to go with Jason X. It's Jason Goes to Space. It's so ridiculous. Everyone remembers it, and it comes out at a time that is almost a decade removed from the rest of the franchise. So it really kind of stands on its own in that way, and it's a weird one. I am excited to talk about it. We have a lot of fun slashers lined up for this month. And on top of that, in our Discord, we will be having a watch party on October 16th. We will be watching the brand new film in the Halloween franchise, Halloween Ends, the final film in the new trilogy starring Jamie Lee Curtis. And I am so excited for that one. So we'll be watching it along with the community. Join us again in the Discord, October 16th for that. Andrew, you excited to watch that one, Halloween Ends? Are you enjoying this new series of movies?
I really liked Halloween. I have no idea why I've taken so long to watch Halloween Kills. I just really don't. I think it's because I want to watch it with Liz, and our opportunities to like digest new intense horror movies, especially when it's like something like Halloween. You got to kind of be in the right state of mind for that. It doesn't come around too often. But I really liked Halloween. I remember when Halloween came out. I saw it legitimately like 3 or 4 times in theaters. I saw it myself. I saw it with my friends. I saw it with my sister. I was just stoked. It was great. I really, really loved it. And then I saw reception to Kills was a little more mixed. Apparently, there are people who really liked what Kills was doing, and there are people who did not like what Kills was doing. There's also the original cut, then there's an extended cut. I've heard people say the extended cut is the better version. I think you actually said that to me. But so I don't, and in that regard, I don't know which one to watch. I don't know if the extended cut of Kills really modifies the story. So
the extended cut of Kills has an alternate ending or extended ending, depending on how you look at it, but it is not canon. So it's if you want what is canon and what's going to lead into the third movie, you got to watch the theatrical. Ultimately, it's not that much of a difference in your like viewing enjoyment. I guess I'd recommend watching theatrical first, and then just like maybe if you watch it a second time, watch extended or just watch that extra ending. But like I said, it's not canon. Can't tell you why until you've seen the movie. I am excited to talk to you about that one, but yeah, Andrew, you gotta get on it. You gotta watch it. I really like. It is. I really like Kills. I recognize It does. It's different than 18, but I like the changes that they
I've
made.
inferred some things about it from the trailers for Ends because I see them before the movies that I go to. So I'm not quite at the like. Once I get in my chair with my treats and my drink, I'm not. There's no agility to like run out of the theater when a trailer starts for me. Like it's gone. I'm like I'm settled. I'm here. I can't do it, and I'm not ready to bring out the sensory deprivator 5000 just for the trailers. But I there's some things that I feel like I might have inferred from having seen the trailer for Ends without having seen Kills. Some characters that are not there, some characters that might be hiding. I don't know, but I have a feeling I might see one or two things. I might know one or two things coming, but we'll discuss that again after the once I've seen it.
Yeah, time is running out, Andrew. Again, October 16th in our Discord. Be there. We're watching Halloween Ends, but for now, we're talking Jason X, the movie that was released April 26th of 2002. Now, it's weird. I said in the beginning this is a 2001 movie. It was released in Spain in 2001. This did not get a very large release. It's only 9 different markets, but Spain gets it early, and then the rest of the world gets it in 2002. So it's technically 2000. Look, it doesn't matter. It was made on a budget of $11 million. That's a small budget for a movie, but not really for a horror or slasher movie. That is kind of in the ballpark that these things get made for. However, worldwide at the box office, it only brings in $17 million. It's not making any kind of significant profit, maybe barely covering production costs, depending on how big that marketing was. And of course, it's not well received by critics. It holds just a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. Very low, but not surprising for the 10th installment of a slasher movie where the slasher goes into space, right?
Yeah, it's not the first of the slasher franchises to go into space, but
who went there first? Leprechaun? Who was in space first?
I think it's Hellraiser, maybe, because Hellraiser does it, and then Hellraiser does it, and then Leprechaun does it like immediately after, and then we get here in 2002, 2 for Jason. Talk about that more later, but yeah, really, if this movie has a legacy, that's what it is. Jason X is the one where he goes to space. And the one where he kind of gets turned into a robot. And so in that regard, I think it actually becomes more iconic, feels like hyperbole, but like those two things alone make it more memorable, like you said, than a lot of the other ones, where like 1 to 6 are all just kind of playing in variations of the same format, where you've got a camp, you've got kids, you've got a killer. And even 7 kind of stays there. 8, 9 do take things in a different direction, but 10 is the one that I think is more straightforward. This is Jason in a completely different environment, and I think people remember that, for better or worse. Like I said, I'm not gonna say that people remembering what the movie is known for is necessarily a good thing, but it's it's a very strange movie that I think there's actually, I actually kind of agree with you. I think there's some underrated stuff here.
I can't wait to get to it, but
yeah.
Let's talk about this creative team real fast. The movie is written by Todd Farmer. This is his first theatrical writing credit here, Jason X, but continues to work. Wrote on movies like My Bloody Valentine, the remake they did,
which I'm actually going to go out there and say I think is pretty underrated. I think that's
I haven't
actually
watched it, but
solid.
I keep hearing that like it's actually pretty good. I think it's
got one of the Supernatural boys in it. I think it's pretty good. Got that one of the guys from Dawson's Creek. It's not James Vanderbeek or Joshua Jackson.
Well, you're selling me so hard, Andrew. I got to see this now. I got to check it out.
But
I'll definitely have to check that out.
But yeah, I like that one quite a bit. That one's in my Halloween rotation.
Also wrote the Nicolas Cage movie Drive Angry. Another one that has its defenders and has its fans. So some, good steady work for Todd out there.
Yeah, had a little bit of had another film a couple years ago called Trick, another slasher film there too. So still sticking around the genre. So yeah, good for him.
The movie is directed by Jim Isaac. Now, Jim Isaac has been in the industry for decades, for a very long time. For most of that time is working in the special effects department as a supervisor or creature effects. Has credits on movies like Return of the Jedi, Gremlins, and the movie with the greatest title of all time, House 2, The Second Story.
Amazing.
So good.
Amazing. I will never, ever, I don't think there will ever be a better sequel or a better sequel title in the history of the world than that
It's
one.
perfect. It's too good.
It's so obvious, but completely effective. But yeah, has a lot of special effects stuff, which I'm guessing is, we'll talk about this more later, how he gets David Cronenberg to be in this movie, because he ends up doing special effects on a bunch of David Cronenberg's movies like The Fly, Naked Luncheon, Existence, which is spelled with an X because it came out in 1999, which I hate David Cronenberg for a little bit. But
well, also we have Jason X a couple of years later, which I mean, I know it's Roman numeral 10, but it's also to be extreme. Let's be real.
Right. We know what we're doing here. But yeah, quite an interesting career for James Isaac here.
Yeah, not a lot of directing. His directorial debut was actually the third movie of the House franchise called The Horror Show. And then that was in 89, and then doesn't direct again until Jason X, and has a few more directing credits after this, but mostly doing that effect stuff.
Oh, sorry. Existence is supposed to be spelled with an X. It's the Z at the end of Existence. That's the problem with that title.
Oh, I just assumed you meant it started with an X.
No.
You were just mad that an X is in the word existence.
Well, the way they spell
you
it
knew
is
something bothered
E.
you.
It's lowercase e, capital X, and then lowercase rest of the world, then capital Z at the end. So it's it's the most 1999 title for a movie of all time. But yeah, some interesting stuff there. But yeah, like I said, he ends up cultivating, I'm guessing, a friendship with David Cronenberg there. And also, rest in peace to James Isaac. He passed away about 10 years ago from a form of blood cancer. So, yes, rest in peace.
R.I.P. With that said, it is time to jump into this film. Jason Goes to Space, a.k.a. Jason X. After multiple failed attempts to execute the supernatural mass murderer Jason Voorhees, it's decided that the best course of action is to cryogenically freeze the killer. After one final murder spree in the lab, Jason is successfully frozen, along with a member of the science team, Rowan. The two are revived over 450 years later when a spaceship carrying a professor, his students, and a small military outfit discover their bodies amidst the wastelands of Earth. On board the ship, Jason begins killing the crew one by one as they desperately search for a way to stop him. It's Friday the 13th in space, right? I mean, it's Jason killing young people one by one, until you have more than one final person in this version, but same. The baseline is there.
Yeah, the bones of the plot are the same. They're just in space.
First thing we're gonna do, as always, is jump into the cast of this film, and we will be starting with the high point, with the best casting and best performance of the movie. Every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty. They actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Jason X?
Well, Chris, I'm going to go in I don't know if this is considered a slightly different direction. I just really like how he's kind of interacting here in the role he kind of has to play. I'm going with Peter Mensah as Sergeant Elijah Brodsky.
I think that's solid. I think that's solid.
Yeah, there were a couple of performances here that I was really I'm like, you're definitely helping this get through its runtime, and he's one of them. He plays kind of the head of this military outfit that's on the ship for some reason. We're not the whole nature of what exactly the whole nature of what it is exactly going on here is very strange. Like, it's a student field trip, but there's a military outfit. Like, I don't, I'm watching the movie wrong. I get it, but
sure.
It's But I really like what he's doing. He gets to play the kind of, classic sardonic military guy who just kind of has his quips and his dry wit to everything. He gets some big moments. He gets kind of a big moment at the end that I was actually kind of hyped for when, like kind of right at the end of the movie, he gets two kind of big saves that I thought were really awesome. And kind of just, again, he's, you could say, understands the assignment. He understands that this is camp and he's given it the right level of seriousness, but not taking it too seriously. So yeah, that's my pick. Peter Mensah, Brodsky.
Yeah, that's awesome. Friend of the show, my wife, enjoys this movie. Thinks it's quite fun, which I think is the right way to watch this movie. And she told me before I started recording that Peter Mensah is her Mark Strong Award. She loves this guy. She loves this actor. He's in True Blood, which I think is the biggest thing that she knows him from. Also had a run on Sleepy Hollow, that TV series. And the dude's got credits up and down TV and film. The dude works a lot. But yeah, very memorable. It's an important role in a movie like this. The no-nonsense military guy that's going to blast Jason full of bullets, but the bullets aren't going to work, right? He's not afraid to go like toe-to-toe with Jason. And he's got this great... We think it's a death scene, but he doesn't actually take him down. But he gets stabbed through the ribs, and he's got the line he used in the beginning. It's going to take more than a poke to the ribs to take down this, or put down this old dog. And then he stabs him in the ribs like with another rod, and he goes, "Yep, that ought to do it." And then we assume he's dead after that until he shows up later, clinging on to life, and gets to fight Jason again. It's good. It's definitely one of the more memorable performances. I'll say, a slasher movie, we're not going to go through every single person in this cast. There's like 20 plus people. Most of them are there to get slaughtered by Jason. Let's be real. And there's not a lot of performance to talk about. So we're going to be talking about a select few of them. But even given the genre and what's being asked of them, I think there's a handful that rise above just being fodder for Jason and make their characters memorable. Peter is certainly one of them, so I think it's a great choice. My Mark Strong Award is going to someone else, however. I have to give it to Lisa Ryder as KM-14, the android that is aboard this ship. It is, because at the end of the day, this is a slasher movie, but it's also a sci-fi movie. We're also way in the future. We're on a spaceship. People are dressed like it's the future. There's a lot of weird technology, and they're really embracing it with this character. And we've seen a lot of androids on film before like this that are very, human passing. And I think she does a good job finding her own way to play it. She talks normal. She doesn't talk all robotic or weird. But there's little mannerisms and movements where you're like, okay, something's off. Something's not quite right about this. And then you find out she's an android and it all makes sense. She also gets to go toe-to-toe with Jason a couple times towards the end of this movie, which I think are some of the most fun scenes of the film that I really enjoy. Her arc is that she wants to be more like a real woman. There's a scene where she's trying on nipples because she doesn't have any and she wants to look like the other girls. This movie is so weird, but
this movie is so strange. But yeah,
but I like this performance a lot. I like this character. I like her weird romance with the guy that made her, and it definitely stands out. It's the standout performance for me in this movie.
Definitely. It's like you said, we've seen plenty of androids in these scenarios before. I've been going back all the way to Alien or even just, famous robots from science fiction is its whole own thing. But yeah, she stands out here. She gets some good quips, the kind of weird, like, I'm trying to be quippy, but I don't quite understand it because I'm not actually human type stuff she says sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, she gets a gnarly fight with Jay. I mean, it's kind of generous calling it a fight because she straight up owns the dude. But
yeah,
the first.
But then he becomes Uber Jason and like crushes her right back. So it's
crushes her right back. But that fight where she gets to just straight up like just crush him is, like I said, we'll talk more about it later. But it's one of the funnest scenes in the movie. But yeah, she's been out there for a long time. She's one of at least a few alums from the Andromeda television series that's in this movie. And been doing plenty of stuff even up to now. But yeah, I think this is a great pick. I think she gets a lot of chances to stand out here. Like you said, these movies tend to be, it's fodder. You have a lot of people that are in this movie just to die. And she sort of survives, but she's one of the people that gets a little bit more to dig into, and she makes the most of it.
Going through the rest of this cast, we've got to acknowledge the man, Jason Voorhees himself, Kane Hodder, in his third turn as this character, the most of any actor, which is kind of strange. There are as many movies as there are, and they're making them all back to back. They're really cycling through who gets to play Jason, but for entries 8, 9, and 10, it's all Kane Hodder, who, interestingly enough, Andrew, is an alum of this show. He has an uncredited role in Daredevil, which we didn't even pick up on when we covered it, but then we watched the director's cut in our Discord, and he's like sitting ringside during Matt's dad's last fight. I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's Jason. That's the bad guy's bodyguard is Jason. Kane Hodder randomly.
Yeah, actually, he'd done this role since 7, not just 8. He did 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Okay, 4 times. I got it wrong.
So he'd been 4 times here. Also does have a part in House 2, the second story. So awesome. Another weird connection through all of that. But yeah, Kane Hodder has become this kind of... He's arguably the most synonymous person to ever play Jason because he did it so many times. Did it in the 4 movies and then did the video game recently too. He came back to do some stuff for that too, but also just tons of stuff in horrors and slashers. He's in like some of the Children of the Corn movies. He's in the Hatchet films. He's got some stunt work as Leatherface. So he's technically played Leatherface, Jason, and sort of technically in a stretch Freddy Krueger. So he's got a lot of... He plays Freddy's hand at the end of Friday the 13th Part 9.
Right.
So
that's pretty impressive.
He's stepped into a lot of different roles and a lot of franchises. He's a guy that at horror conventions, he's the Frank Welker of horror conventions, basically. He's got a lot of things you could check off there. But yeah, it's cool to see him get the nod here. I mean, like you said, it's the series up until 7. I can't say for certain, but I think Jason was different in every single one. Because in some of them, it's not even really Jason, but that's a different discussion. But yeah, so cool for him to get the nod here. Unfortunate he didn't keep getting the nod, but he's Jason, and he plays Jason like Jason.
Yeah, all the hallmarks of the character, sitting up. He does really well. He takes a rain of bullets very well. When he's getting shot up with the machine gun and his body just shakes back and forth, and then he falls to the ground, but they walk up and he's not there. Classic Jason stuff. He's got it down. He acts with his eyes. Sometimes a close up of the mask, and you see his eyes through it, and they dart to one side or the other. Kind of the extent of his acting. Most of it is physical performance and stunt work, but yeah, he's the man. He can do it all. I think that's synonymous with the name Jason Voorhees. Our lead of this movie, if you can call it that, the scientist that gets frozen along with Jason, it's a character named Rowan, played by Lexa Doig, an alum of the TV show Andromeda, along with Lisa, like we mentioned earlier, as well as the sci-fi show Eureka. And there's kind of a theme as we go through this cast. A lot of television actors from previous sci-fi TV shows, because at the end of the day, this is a sci-fi movie. But she has an interesting role because she is from our time, the early 2000s, quote unquote, our time. And she gets, thawed out hundreds of years later. So she is learning all this new technology and sort of introducing old phrases and concepts that the characters don't understand. And of course, she knows all about Jason Voorhees, and she's warning them, like, no, this is an unstoppable killing machine. You should destroy him or leave him behind. And of course, they don't listen, because it wouldn't be a slasher movie if they did. And he causes rampage, and she is one of our survivors at the end.
Yes.
I guess you could call her a final girl, because the other final girl's an android, so she's the final girl. But just a lot of fun with, again, that juxtaposition of being a woman out of time.
Yeah, she takes it surprisingly in stride. There's not a whole lot.
Yes,
she's, of all the people I've ever seen do the person out of time thing, she's definitely the one who takes to it the easiest. But
Yeah, it's 400 years in the future. Oh, okay. Where's Jason?
yeah,
Is he dead?
there's just, and I mean, I guess if you're dealing with Jason, maybe he becomes the primary. Maybe you're like, I'll figure out how you replicate food on these ships later. But she gets a couple of jokes. Like at one point, she's like, "Can you just beam us off?" And they're like, "What? Ridiculous." So it's so she gets to have some fun jokes with all of that. But yeah, she gets, like I said, it's like you said, rather, it's a weird space to sit, kind of that kind of out of time situation on top of everything else that's happening. But I think she's up to the task. And a lot of television sci-fi alum here in this cast. Like I said, it's a sci-fi movie, so it's not hugely shocking. But I think she's solid, does exactly everything that needs to be done, and takes it all in stride.
Chuck Campbell plays Sunaron Payton. I'm reading a lot of these names in the credits, and like I don't remember them saying their name a lot in the movie, just kind of the nature of the film it is. But his character is the one that programs the android KM-14 and has that special relationship with her that sort of turned romantic throughout the movie. And I like this character. Very earnest, very almost innocent, I guess, is kind of in over his head, but ends up scraping by and surviving and getting a big kiss with the android at the end, who's just ahead at that point. Again, weird movie we have here. Also an alum of sci-fi television, coming from the series Stargate Atlantis.
Which to the credit of him comes after this movie, to be fair. But
really, I thought that was the 90s.
Stargate comes earlier. Stargate Atlantis is later.
I've never seen a single piece of Stargate media.
I've seen the movie with Kurt Russell and James Spader, but I have not seen any of the shows. Although I've heard they are quite fun. Have their fan bases. Has bit parts in a couple of other things. I know has a small part in the Mouth of Madness, which is a weird supernatural horror film by John Carpenter. Also has a small part in Urban Legends Final Cut, back when they were trying to turn Urban Legends into its own slasher franchise. And then gets the nod here in Jason X, and then goes on to do some other sci-fi stuff. But yeah, he's kind of, there's like an innocence to him. He's not, a lot of these characters, despite the setting, are still come off very much like typical teenagers. The setting, the sci-fi setting doesn't seem to phase most of them. And he kind of falls into that a little bit. Like, he's obviously got the sci-fi parts by building and programming the android, but there's still very much a youthful energy to the character that still comes through.
Melissa Aid plays Janessa Zachary. Now, she is almost a final girl, but she has a very memorable death towards the end of this movie. That's not even really from Jason, but it's still memorable nonetheless. She is
the alien resurrection death, man.
Yes, she does, Andrew. I gotta say, her death scene is great.
I hate you.
It's great.
I hate you.
She gets sucked through a grate, folks. It's very good. But her character, speaking of,
people do not let him get away with that.
They are. I can hear them laughing in their car on the way to work or wherever the hell people listen to us.
I'm not laughing with you, Chris.
Speaking of, these are just teenagers that happen to be in the future. She sleeps with the professor, and she is very aloof, kind of a Mean Girls-y type character to some of the characters. Also very sarcastic, has some pretty funny lines. Even her death, we're just going to talk about it. There's a hole in the spaceship. She is holding onto the floor grating so she doesn't get sucked out the little hole. One of the floor grates gets sucked up and it's pressed against the hole, and she can't reach the people for safety. She goes, "Oh, this sucks on so many levels." And then she falls victim to her death. So you thought my pun was bad. She's got a nice one right there before she gets killed. I've got to talk about her clothes. Like, in general, the clothes of this movie are just so revealing. Like, it's sci-fi. They're all like made out of like sweater material for some reason, but they're like exposing their stomach. I mean, guys and girls. The guys are wearing like fishnets. They made a lot of decisions, but hers are like it's like a vest with exposes her entire midsection of her torso. It's on the one hand, it's like, yeah, it's a slasher movie, so like, we've got to be sleazy. But on the other
But you're in
hand,
space.
Andrew, but here's the thing, Andrew. 50 years ago, let's go 70 years ago. You think of like the way average people dressed. I mean, you would never see low-rise jeans or midriffs on women. Like in general, in our culture, we have been wearing less and less clothes and more revealing clothing. Who's to say that's not going to continue over the next 100 years? Maybe this is very accurate. Maybe as we sort of lose our preconceived notions of what it means to show skin, maybe in 400 years people will be dressing like this, Andrew. Maybe it's very accurate.
Well, we'll reconvene then and discuss, and we'll go through it.
Okay. Yeah, nothing else. I like her character. I like her death. It's fun.
It's fun. She, like I said, she gets some fun lines. She gets to be just a very, very strange scene with their professor. Just a very, very strange scene. But yeah, she's having a good time. And like you said, I guess her pun was worse than yours. Although I have to give her credit for thinking of such a thing moments before her death, which she had to know was coming.
Jonathan Potts plays the professor to all of these students, Professor Brandon Lowe. And it's an interesting role. He's the bad guy. He's the whole reason Jason is kept alive, because he thinks he can make a lot of money off of him, having this frozen specimen that was a notorious killer and has these regenerative properties. He sleeps with a student, like we established earlier, in a very weird sex scene that some would say is unnecessary, but it's in there anyway.
I would say.
Jonathan Potts is primarily a voice actor, Andrew.
Is he now?
And he is. And one of his most famous roles, Andrew, is providing the voice of Link from the Legend of Zelda animated series, which means this man is responsible for the line, "Excuse me, princess." He's a legend.
Oh my God. I had Chris specifically asked me not to look up this guy's filmography just so that he could tell me that, and worth it.
Oh, it's great. I've got to drop that clip in here in case anybody hadn't seen it. Here you go.
Well, excuse me, princess.
You're welcome. You've now heard it.
Beautiful. Oh my God. Heavens.
Andrew, that is about the end of where I think we need to go as far as dissecting performances in this movie, but there's a few smaller roles we want to acknowledge. First of all, our writer, Todd Farmer, has a small role as Private Dallas. He's involved in a very cool scene where they're fighting in like a AR video game type simulation that I enjoy a lot. And then the other small role to be acknowledged, Andrew, go ahead, let's talk about it. Early in this movie, we see
David Cronenberg as Dr.
So
Wimmer. He shows up. He's in this movie. His screen time is probably genuinely less than 60 seconds. It is a cameo for all intents and purposes. As we established, I'm guessing that Jim Isaac would have worked with him on Existence just a couple of years before this, and already worked with him on The Fly and Naked Lunch. So like he's got a working relationship, and I'm guessing he just called him up and said, "Hey, why don't you just do this little bit cameo at the beginning of this movie?" And I'm sure David Cronenberg was down for that.
He gets killed by Jason. That's pretty cool.
He gets killed by Jason. And he thinks he's running away to safety, but then he gets killed with a machete across the room, which pretty gnarly in the grand scheme of things. But he did direct an episode of the Friday the 13th series back in the day. So it was already an additional connection there. And then I actually just saw him there's this TV show called Slasher, which is just an anthology slasher series where every season is a different slasher, as evidenced by the title. But he plays like this patriarch of this kind of jaded, rich, old money family in the 4th season that kind of sets off the events of the whole series, and he's just there as the dad of this family. It's very strange, but yeah, David Cronenberg showing up everywhere.
Well, it's time that we jump into the scenes of this movie, specifically the best scenes, or at the very least, our favorite scenes of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this film firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in Jason X?
I mean, we've alluded to it already, but for me, it has to be the first KM14 Jason fight scene. That's for me kind of when I'm having the most fun, because everybody on screen looks like they're having a blast, quite literally. So our setup here is that basically, because this movie's kind of divided into 3 parts. Like, you kind of get the setup is getting Jason into space. That's kind of our first act. The second act is kind of his slow reemergence. And then we get to our third final act, which is kind of like this big showdown. And then his rebirth is Uber Jason, as he's called here, not Mecha Jason, which is just, I gotta say, a missed opportunity. So he kind of is he's doing the Jason things. He's going through the ship. He sees 2 teenagers having sex. He kills one of them. Because no sex anywhere, guys. These people learned nothing. But
Can't believe people are still having sex 400 years into the future.
Jason's just outraged. He's just like, I cannot believe this is still happening. But yeah, so he's slowly lumbering around. They're slowly becoming aware of what's happening, and then it all finally crashes down, and that leads to this fight where Sunaran, is that his name? Sunaran. Anyway, he basically programs his android to be able to fight. So as things kind of are looking very dire, he just unveils KM14, now in her black leather attire with bullet bandoliers for no reason.
My notes say Leather Mama in all caps.
Yeah. There was definitely some choices being made by Sunaran there, and he liked them all. So, so this ends up with a big fight back and forth where, in wrestling terms, it's a bit of a squash. I got to be honest with you. This is
yeah.
It's Jason does not get in a whole lot of offense here. He kind of, you think he does right off the bat. This is actually something kind of clever I liked. Is, she shows up and she's looking all tough, and then Jason just chucks his machete and it stabs her in the stomach, and like there's that moment really of like, oh, is that it? Like, is that where we were going with this? Just the big moment to be crushed. But she actually like tricks him. So he like comes up and he's going to take the machete back, but then she kind of is like, whoop, gotcha, I'm a robot, and just starts beating him up. And just, again, puts the hurt on. Like, it's very much like just a one-sided fight, but it's still a blast. Like, Jason is unfazed at a lot of points. And like, even as like he is getting limbs blown off his body, there is that stoic, like, no, like he just keeps going. It's this
Doesn't sell the pain at all.
That weird power that he has. It just keeps going. And so finally they blow apart his head. And you can't believe nobody didn't think of that before. But yeah, it's a blast. I have a lot of fun watching it. And then that ultimately leads to Jason kind of being reborn as Mecha Jason. So, but yeah, Lisa Ryder as KM14 is having a blast here. Kane Hodder is up to the task. It's just a fun scene. It's a blast. And I'm going to tell you guys, Mecha Jason looks kind of cool.
He does. He does look really cool. And what I find interesting is like Uber Jason's kind of all over the marketing. In the trailer, I don't think we ever see like a full body shot of him, but like the poster of this movie is a big Jason mask with his machete in the middle, and half of it is his classic look, and the other half of his face is this new Uber Jason look. And the tagline is "Evil gets an upgrade." So like they're teasing this.
It's like, it's coming.
New Jason, but it doesn't happen like the last 20 minutes of the movie, 15 minutes of the movie, till the very end. So it's interesting they tease it so much with it being ultimately a small part of the movie, but I do think he looks very cool when he gets remade. But yeah, this scene's a lot of fun. I love, again, her look, leather, head to toe in skin tight leather, very Matrix, very Equilibrium for some other movies that came out. This very much a sign of the times. So this movie was made, but it works. It's very cool. She absolutely destroys him. You're right. Shoots limbs off, literally blows his head off. There's just like a piece of the mask left on a stump at the end of his neck after she shoots it. However, her big error is that she blasts his body onto the body repair machine thing that takes control and heals him up at the end. I don't know why they didn't think to move his body off of that thing.
He collapses through it. So I think it was not out of the question to be like, well, that thing's broken. So
double tap, Andrew. You've always got to go the extra step to make sure the killer doesn't come back.
That's true.
It's great. And it's, as much as she squashes him, whenever he's Uber Jason, the very first thing he does is punch her head off. He doesn't use a machete. He punches her in the head, and her head flies off of her body. And then she's just ahead the rest of the movie. So it's so ridiculous. This movie knows exactly what it is. And this is one of those scenes where, like, we're just going to go all out. And there's a great line here. Like, once he comes back as Uber Jason, someone asks, what the hell is going on? And Rowan says, Jason Voorhees, that's what's going on.
And hey,
awesome.
He's right.
Yeah, it's good stuff. That scene is it's a lot of fun. It's a great pick. I'm going to go a different direction, and I might be cheating a little bit, because I'm going to pick a pretty small scene as far as, like, screen time. But it's the most memorable for me, and it is going to be Jason's first kill after he reawakens onto the ship. First of all, him getting reawakened is pretty interesting, because he's on the table, he's being thawed out, quite literally, and then we have a scientist like cutting into him, like she literally cuts his mask off, and like some stuff oozes out of him as his moist skin. And
Chris,
you gotta imagine the smell.
Imagine the smell, damn
it. And you saw it coming. But intercut with this scene are two students that they're having sex. And it literally, like, they're in the like operating room at first, and the scientist is like, because they're all over each other, and she's like, y'all go and take care of that, and then come back when you're able to focus. And they're like, all right, and they go off, and
they just go.
This is a weird movie. This is a weird movie. So we've got a scene of him like twitching a finger, and then we'll cut to them like having sex, and it's almost like just being near teens having sex is what is bringing his body back to life. It's pretty silly. But he sits up, and our scientist lady looks over, sees he's not on the table. She looks back, and boom, there he is behind her. He grabs her head and dunks it into a tank of what is this stuff called, Andrew? The stuff that's in liquid nitrogen? Is that what
liquid
it is?
nitrogen. Yeah.
I only know what it is because of movies. Like, it's just, in movies, you get frozen and your limb shatters because of it. That's the only reason I know what liquid nitrogen is. But it's so cool. He dunks her head underwater. We have a camera inside the liquid nitrogen. We see her face freeze. He pulls it up out of the sink. Her head is frozen, and he smashes it on a counter. Her face goes everywhere, picks her body back up. She has no face, drops her to the ground. Andrew, it might be the coolest kill in the entire franchise. Certainly top 5, certainly up there. And it comes in Jason X. It comes in a pretty maligned movie in this franchise, but there's no doubting that it is so cool, so memorable. It's the best kill in this movie for sure. It's my favorite kill in this movie, although there is another kill that comes pretty close. But it's great. There's a lot of good kills in this movie. This one's my favorite. It's the most memorable scene of the movie, and it's my favorite scene for that reason.
I had a feeling you were going to go with this, because this is definitely one of the most memorable kills. It's very cool. It even got tested on an episode of Mythbusters as to whether or not this would actually work. I do not remember.
How did they test that?
I
know it was on Mythbusters because I watched I actually watched a documentary about the Friday the 13th series called Camp Crystal Lake Memories.
Yeah.
It is almost 7 hours long. It is a very thorough documentary, but it's very good. They spent a lot of time in each industry, and they mentioned that they did this on Mythbusters, but like, I haven't watched the segment yet, so I'll have to go find a link. I'll put it in our Discord. We can see what they discover.
We can figure that out. But yeah, so it's a memorable kill. Like you said, there are a couple of others in this that get brought up. There's one it's pretty gnarly, but it's also just really rewatching it. It was very funny to me, just how it all builds. But I can't fault. I mean, literally, this scene is less than a minute, maybe, but it's extremely effective. It definitely establishes that despite the fact that we're now in space, Jason is still just as much as ever a master of his environment. He knows what is around, and he knows how to use it to his advantage to kill people. And he starts off with he unfortunately Citizen Kane's himself. He gives himself the best kill right after he wakes up, and there's just no way you can top that. So he should have just jumped out of the airlock.
His next kill is just those teenagers having sex. He just puts a machete through his chest. It's like, oh, all right, that's about as basic as it gets.
We back to this. Jason, you're D-, dude. You started off so strong. Nice form, a little rough on the landing. He may have to settle for the bronze, but yeah. This is it's one of the coolest kills in the whole movie. This franchise is actually very strange in that, like, some of the most iconic things, like the hockey mask, is like the most synonymous thing with Jason in a lot of ways, and he doesn't wear that until the third one. Like, he in people seem to forget that in Friday the 13th Part 2, he has a bag over his head. Like, that's it. Like, it's a burlap like a potato sack. Like, it's genuinely a sack. And then obviously in the first one, it's not even spoilers for a 40-year-old movie, folks. He's not even the killer in the first one.
Spoilers for the beginning of Scream.
Yes, or any movie you've seen ever that tries to be meta. But yeah, so it's a great kill. But that's a strange thing about this franchise, and I think it's part of why it ends up has this like longevity, like, because it does these strange things down the line that end up kind of catching on. Like you said, there's iconography of Jason X that's probably more remembered than any of the other films, and then the hockey mask, like you said, it's not even in the first two. So it's odd for a franchise to be like that. Like, Freddy Krueger is Freddy Krueger from like day one. Like, he's always like, he's fully formed, and he just keeps showing up. Jason like takes several movies to get there, and then that becomes the final version that everybody remembers. And so it's an odd thing to think about. Like, Michael Myers, like, he's Michael Myers by that first movie. Like, there's no question. He gets the mask. He does all of that. Jason is kind
he's
of
Captain Kirk from day one.
A whiter Captain Kirk. But it's yeah, so that's always been the strange thing about this franchise, is that it does kind of evolve, and those evolutions are the things that kind of get more remembered, and that's kind of neat.
Kind of neat. I agree, Andrew. We talked already about how this movie really stands out for being in the future and sci-fi and space and so different, but they do manage to sneak in one scene based around a campsite. It is also got to be one of the more memorable scenes of this movie. It's towards the end when Mecha Jason, I'm sorry, I'll respect your better name. Mega Jason is chasing our remaining heroes through the spaceship, and they got to slow them down. They got to come up with a diversion. So they make this simulation based on a 20th century campsite, complete with two teen girls. And so Jason all of a sudden is walking through the simulation of a campsite, and these two young, attractive girls say, "Hey, you want a beer? You want to smoke some pot? Or we can have premarital sex." We love premarital sex. That should have been my line in the beginning of this episode, didn't it? Hello, and we love premarital sex. But this is one of those scenes where you're like, yeah, Todd Farmer knows what he's doing. Yeah. It's not quite a parody of Friday the 13th, but it embraces the sleaziness, the low budgetness, the tropes. Like, it embraces all of it.
The bad writing, like the bad dialogue, like all of that. Like, it's kind of a distillation of the whole thing. And yeah, it works. I don't feel like he's making fun of the franchise. Like, I don't, I feel like it's definitely something meant more as a tribute.
For sure. Speaking of tribute, this kill here, if you can call it that, because these aren't like real girls, but after they take off the top, they say those lines, they climb each to their respective sleeping bag, and then the camera cuts away to another scene. And when it cuts back, Jason is in the middle of killing these girls. He's holding one of their sleeping bags in his hands, and he's swinging it and beating the other sleeping bag with the girl in his hands. And then he slams her against a tree, and that's how he kills these two girls.
Watching this, I was so taken back, because I remember the scene being a lot more brutal than it is. Like, there's no blood in this scene, as far as I remember.
No.
But, like, I just, like, it cuts back, and it's almost, like, hilarious. Just like Jason is just like whacking the sleeping bag, but like none of it feels very brutal, and like the sounds they're making don't sound like they're like dying. It's just like
they're not screaming. Yeah, just some punches. Yeah,
it's just, and then he just swings her around into the tree, and then you're almost like, all right, that's pretty gnarly. But like, yeah, this whole thing is just a fun little detour, and yeah, it's definitely a tribute. But that sleeping bag sequence is another thing often pointed out in this film as being another one of the kind of cooler kills, which, you know, yeah.
What's great about this kill is it was actually used in a previous movie, but it got cut. Literally, if you watch that 7-hour documentary, the story that comes up over and over again is every one of these movies had to be cut down to avoid getting an X rating. So tons of gore and kills are cut out of every single movie. And I hope one day we get those scenes restored, because as far as I know, they haven't been destroyed, and some of them are out there in very rough fashion, but I would love extended versions of all of these movies. But at any rate, the sleeping bag kill, and I don't know, it's somewhere in Friday the 13th, parts 1 through 6, there was a sleeping bag kill that had to get cut. And so Todd put it in this movie so we can finally like get to see it. And it is just as fun as you would expect. It's a really good, really memorable kill. I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites.
And that is the only time in the movie until like the end credits where we get to hear the classic Friday the 13th score.
Yep.
Sound effect. And Andrew, you know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? I'm curious how this is going to come across on a microphone, but I can make that noise. I can make that sound effect with my nose.
Nose.
And yes. And so tell me how this comes across, Andrew. I'm going to give this a shot here. It does involve me putting my fingers in my nose, so I guess it's a good thing it's on a podcast and only Andrew's going to be subjected to me doing this, but tell me if this sounds right.
That's terrible.
All right. Hey, I'm not there yet. Hang on. How's that? How's that sound?
I mean, it's not terrible. I mean, I've definitely heard worse.
Well, I did that
it was
with
better
my
than
nostril.
I was expecting it to be.
See, I learned how to do that when I was like, I don't know, 8 years old probably. And this is the reason why, because one day we would have this podcast and I would get to show the world my talent. So
one day I'm going to meet a stranger named Andrew Williams and we're going to do this podcast. I knew it.
He's going to be so impressed.
He's gonna be the coolest person ever.
Speaking of evolution of Jason, look at that segue, Andrew. This movie, to my knowledge, this is the first time a Friday the 13th movie has canonized Jason's healing ability. Like, no one's really said it out loud. Like, he's always had, like, some supernatural abilities, stuff that would kill a normal man. He keeps going. But it's always... I mean, he gets, like, resurrected by lightning at some point. Really ridiculous.
Yeah.
But this is the first time we've had someone study him and say, like, he has regenerative properties that we want to study and make money off of. And that's neat. I don't know, that's interesting. Something new.
Yeah, it is. Because the movie's all kind of, like you said, the idea of his... It's very strange, because there are movies that basically imply you can't really kill him. You just, like, chain him at the bottom of Crystal Lake and that's it. And then there's other movies where, like, he very much dies. And he comes back because a metal rod stuck through his chest gets hit by lightning and brings him back to life. That's how part 6 starts. Like, you know, you get some exceptions. Like, he's not technically in part 1 or 5. And, like, it's yeah, I think this is the first time they've really genuinely like taken it and like ran with it, because the intro to this movie, first off, is very strange looking. Like it's I when I first put on the beginning of it, because the end of the last movie, which is a decade prior to this, like ends with Jason supposedly being like definitively defeated. And
Dragged into hell by Freddy.
Dragged into hell by Freddy. Setting up a sequel crossover that would take 12 years. But talk about the slow burn. But he so the beginning of this movie starts off with this weird, it looked like when I first watched it, I was like, are we in hell? Like, is that the thing? But then you realize that like all they're just doing is trying to kill him a bunch of times. Like you're just watching very strange points of view with like needles and stuff and trying to kill him. And then ultimately they find out that they can't. Like he just will not die. And yeah, so they finally kind of, like you said, they canonize that idea that he won't die. And it's a thing. And this is something we're actually going to try to monetize and at the bare minimum study in the past. Like that's David Cronenberg's whole motivation, is that his death or his inability to die is something that they need to study more. And then in the future, it's more just, he's a freak show that'll make me a lot of money. But
and Cronenberg has the line, "I'm moving him to our Scranton facility," which is funny to me because I can't help but hear the word Scranton and think of The Office. And like they're gonna move him to like, we have a wacky crossover with Michael Scott or something.
Michael Scott's just like, got a new employee today. He's frozen. We're going to throw him a party because everybody new here deserves a party. But yeah, again, the name drop of Scranton was very strange. Like, why didn't you just say like anywhere else? Like your Denver facility would have sounded better than your Scranton facility. Like, but yeah, that's an interesting little ripple to kind of finally admit that, hey, this dude has a lot of trouble dying.
I mentioned it a bit earlier, but there is a scene where there's two characters, because again, we're in the future, baby, fighting a simulation, fighting like these big monster dinosaur looking things, and the CG looks a little rough, but it's okay because it's like a video game. I thought that was kind of clever. Like they don't have the budget for really good CGI, but it's worked into the story where like it doesn't have to look perfect because it's just people in like a training simulation fighting these monsters. And this whole setup is very clever where Jason like walks into their simulation. He kills one of the guys, but he just kills his avatar. And then like they end the simulation and they're sitting there like with their controllers in their hand. I just thought that was fun. You're going to do Jason in the future, Jason in space. You want to come up with those setups that aren't just killing teens over and over again we've seen before. Like what can we do that's going to be unique to this movie? And I think they hit that note a lot again with the face freeze kill that I love, and with this fun scene here with the video game simulation.
I agree. I think this is it's a fun way. Well, it's a little twist too, because like he kills one of them and you're like, oh, and then he's not fazed by it. The guy is just like, what's come on, like he's just annoyed. And
like, oh man. Yeah,
like, I've lost my game. So, and then of course they come out of the simulation and get killed anyway. But yeah, it's a again, it shows some creativity. Like you could have easily just phoned this in, and they didn't do that. They had a good time with it.
And then on the same token, there's kills that aren't necessarily specific to being in the future, but there's still a lot of care put into them, and they're still memorable. I love the one where one of the military guys gets pushed off a ledge and falls onto like a giant screw and like it stabs him through the chest. And if that's not enough, he starts slowly spinning down the screw, and his body spins and spins and spins as the screw goes through it. Like that's gnarly. It's brutal. It's kind of funny. And then, of course, when someone asks, "What's his condition?" they say, "He's screwed." Todd Farmer knows what the people want.
He knows exactly what they want. Yeah. So definitely some fun kills.
Yeah. I wouldn't go as far as say like this is like a comedy or even like horror comedy, but there's there's funny stuff. There's plenty of comedic goofs and lines like that. My favorite like visual bit here is they think they're gonna get rescued because they're gonna dock at this space station, but Jason kills the pilot before they can dock. So instead of docking, they crash through the space station, keep on floating through space. And the professor's like, "It's all right. We just overshot it. We'll turn around and go back." And you can see through a window Solaris, the space station, exploding in the background as he's saying that. And just a good visual gag that I like.
Please disperse. There's nothing to see here.
Yes. You know, I skimmed through a few reviews of this movie. And, you know, we're a hashtag positivity podcast. We don't need to read you like these negative reviews, but we know it didn't get a lot of good reviews. But a recurring theme that I saw was people saying that this was an Alien ripoff, which I had never thought of it. I've seen this movie a few times, and I didn't really get Alien vibes from it. But I think there's a few things there. One, capitalism is bad, and capitalistic greed is leading to all of this stuff happening. People want to make money off the monster.
Yeah.
Very Alien. You have one killing machine on a spaceship with a crew picking them off one by one. Very Alien. And then when I was preparing to this episode, I started to think that maybe this was all intentional because one of the characters' names, played by Derwin Jordan, is Waylander, which is, you know, Wayland Corporation with an ER at the end. So maybe those are actually clever nods at the Alien franchise after all.
Maybe
And then
there's a little smoke to that fire.
Getting sucked through the grate like Alien Resurrection.
Yep.
The movie does end with a bit of a cliffhanger. Now, we know that nothing ever came of this and nothing probably ever will, but I think it's a fun setup. It's interesting because the whole reason this movie is made is because Freddy vs. Jason it's taken forever to come out. And it's been so long since a Friday the 13th movie that they literally were like, hey, let's make a movie real quick so people like remember who Jason is before we do the crossover. As if he's not a pop culture icon. It's kind of silly, but that's literally like the origin of this movie. Like, hey, make a movie real fast. Hey, Todd, can you write us a movie? And it's set in the future, so it doesn't mess with any timelines for any current movies they want to do or Freddy vs. Jason. Literally the whole reason this movie exists. But regardless, at the end, there's a fun setup for a sequel because they do escape the spacecraft, but Jason, who was left behind on the exploding spaceship, is making his way towards the rescue vessel. Like he's literally just floating through space at him. And then Peter Mintz's character, Sergeant Elijah, in his spacesuit, like grabs Jason out of space and diverts him towards a different direction. And then we get a shot of the two of them. The sergeant like holding Jason like in a rear naked choke on his back as they enter an atmosphere of a planet and start descending. And that shot of the two of them with the sergeant on his back, it is very much like Buzz and Woody from Toy Story, falling.
Very much.
It's so goofy looking. But this planet is very much like Earth. And doing research, it's referred to as Earth 2, but I don't think they put that in the movie. But regardless, we see this young... Do they call it Earth 2?
They call it Earth 2 at one point.
Okay. So they're falling onto Earth 2, which looks a lot like Earth 1 in the present day, conveniently. And we have this young couple at a lake, and they see a shooting star. We know what that shooting star is. It's Jason falling to the planet. And they say, let's go check it out. And you get a nice visual of his Uber mask floating to the bottom of a lake. And you get our one more time before we go into credits. So we're setting up that this Jason could regenerate on Earth 2 and just start all over again. And it would look just like the old movies because this Earth 2 looks just like Earth 1. And that would have, I don't know, it would have been so fun to do like part 11 that looks just like the old movies, and you just don't acknowledge that we're hundreds of years in the future because they're now on a planet that looks just like our modern Earth. But it doesn't come to pass.
There were some comic book sequels, but they don't play off of this setup. They like retcon the end of Jason X to being a different situation, and I don't know. It's kind of a bummer because, like you said, you had a relatively interesting setup there, and yeah, it never comes to pass. Freddy versus Jason comes out a year from this, not even. It's a pretty quick turnaround from this to Freddy versus Jason, which makes it all kind of the stranger that this movie even exists in the first place. But yeah, it's, and even the reboot, like, you could have easily just made that reboot a sequel to this by putting it on Earth 2. You could have done it. You could have done it, Michael Bay.
Yeah, I don't know what's next with this franchise. I mean, rights are all over the place. It affected the video game that they made. The reason it's called Jason X and not Friday the 13th is because they only had rights to Jason as a character and not the Friday the 13th name. That's why Part 9 is called Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Friday, and not Friday the 13th, Part 9. So, very weird rights. And they got them all together for that reboot, but I don't think there's a sequel coming for that reboot because it also was poorly received and didn't make a lot of money. So, I don't know what's next, but I love this franchise. I enjoy them all for various reasons. This one's no exception. There's fun kills. It's ridiculous. It's goofy. Jason in space, sure, why not? I've said throughout the episode, I think they deliver on the things we like, even if they are tropey and trashy and not a critical darling by any means. It's giving me what I want, Andrew.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a franchise that's it's interesting because for so long these franchises were just staples of the September October movie theaters. Every year for Halloween, you'd have some array of slashers coming out, and both these franchises, this one and Nightmare on Elm Street, have just sat for so long. They both had those reboots that kind of came and went relatively unquestioned, and they've just not picked up on those. I think Robert Englund has maybe a legacy Nightmare sequel that I'm sure he's got one in him if he really wants to go there. But yeah, it's been interesting to just see them kind of fade. And like you said, rights is a big thing. Friday the 13th is notorious for its rights situation. It's basically Victor Miller versus Sean S. Cunningham. They're forever going back and forth on who owns the rights to this, who owns the rights to that. It's the same thing that happened with James Bond and Spectre. That's why Spectre disappeared from the James Bond movies for 20 years, if not longer, because the rights to who created Spectre got put in dispute until Eon Productions just finally bought them back. But I like the franchise a lot, and it kind of sucks that it's become so kind of non-existent now. For lack of a better word. A weird aside, I do want to share something for fans of this franchise that may be looking for something that's a little interesting to check out. I went to a book signing a couple of months ago with an author named Grady Hendrix. He's a fantastic horror writer. He wrote a book called Horror Store, which is like a horror store set. It's a horror story set in IKEA or an IKEA-like space. So as you're reading through the book, you're seeing ads for the different furniture as this story kind of unfolds. But he's written a lot of kind of meta, self-aware horror novels. But he writes one called The Final Girl Support Group, which is obviously playing off the final girl trope. But it was based off of a story that he remembers reading in an issue of Fangoria in the 80s. And it's centered around Adrienne King, who plays Alice Hardy in the first film, being brought back for Friday the 13th Part 2. And she was not given a script for that film before showing up to shoot it. Because as many of you may know, Alice Hardy is in Part 2, but not for very long. She is in the first scene in the apartment, and she does not escape that scene. Alice Hardy didn't know this going into shooting that. She thought she was the lead character of this sequel. And then she's killed so unceremoniously. And he remembers reading that story that genuinely, they brought her to set, walked her through the scene, because the first movie didn't have a completed script either. So they were so not having a script didn't seem strange to her. That, people would be like, why did she sign on not knowing that. But for the first film was very much like fly by night type production. So that didn't really seem strange to her. But she shows up, they're walking her through the scene. They're like, hey, just kind of improv a conversation with your mom on the phone. And then they kind of very quickly are like, all right, now turn around and react to being killed. And she was like, what? And they were like, all right. So they literally shoot the death scene, stuff her in a van, drop her back off at the motel, and then essentially ghosted her. And Grady Hendrix always thought that was a sad story. Like, he's like, that seems like a very strange way for that character to end. You survive the first movie just to die at the beginning of the second one, which is almost a trope in its own at this point, surviving a movie just to die at the beginning of the next one. But he ends up writing the book, The Final Girl Support Group, based off of kind of how he personally would have envisioned a story like that ending in a different world. And it's very good. And then Adrienne King herself reads the audiobook for it. So I actually highly recommend
that's fun. That's cool.
The audiobook to hear Alice Hardy herself reading this book to you. But yeah, it's definitely a great book, and it just again plays into the fact that the production of these movies is so strange and sometimes very unfortunate in that regard. Because Alice Hardy, not Alice Hardy, but Adrienne King was also dealing with like a stalker at that point in her life, and so kind of getting dropped off at a hotel and having no contact with anybody was not a great situation, and a lot of stuff like that. But yeah, anybody looking for something interesting like that, check out Final Girl Support Group. You mentioned, I think, that friend of the show, your wife, was reading Final Girls by Riley Sager. Same type of energy, same type of situation. Okay. But so if you like that, then vice versa. If you like Final Girl Support Group, check out Final Girls by Riley Sager. This has been Andrew's book recommendations for the month.
Man, I love the spooky season. I love Halloween. I love October. We've already got, I guess it's not going to be so surprising when you hear this, but it's still September as we're recording this. But Halloween stuff is already out. We got decorations. We got a skeleton waving to people on the street. It's good stuff. I love Halloween movies. I love slashers. I love the whole season. How about you, Andrew?
I too am a big fan. You and I both know that I'm also a big Christmas mark, but I love. I love the fall. I love, especially being in a place where like fall is a thing, which I know you guys don't quite get to experience down in Texas, but
just hot. It's just hot all the time.
Just hot. It's just hot and less hot. But here we're actually getting like the change. The temperatures are lowering. The leaves are changing. All that stuff. It's kind of cool. Just be a part of that. But yeah, I love going to the movies. I love I've already seen a couple of horror movies in the theaters already. Got more coming. That I'm excited to go watch. Obviously, Halloween's coming. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the spooky season. Don't know if I put it above Christmas, not to be sacrilegious to Halloween fans, but I love the season. It's fantastic.
No, I agree. I also love Christmas. It's probably my favorite holiday, and I like having these kind of back-to-back. I personally, I do not care about Thanksgiving. You don't decorate for it. I think the food is fine. It's the same crap I'm not that into it. So like if my family will do things, one of my parents will cook or whatever, and of course I'm gonna go over there and celebrate. But like if no one invited me anywhere for Thanksgiving, I wouldn't do anything for Thanksgiving. I wouldn't make it a point to like cook, and I do not care about it. But Halloween I love. Christmas I really love. I wish you could just flow from one to the other, but we gotta stop for Thanksgiving. Also my birthday is thrown in there, but I wish you could roll from one to the other.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Everything you can have for dinner on Thanksgiving, you can also have for dinner on Christmas. So just skip it.
Hey, that's a good point. And then if you have the big feast on Thanksgiving, then it's a month later you're having it for Christmas. It's not as special. So just save it for Christmas.
This has been Hot Takes, brought to you by Best of the Rest.
I've got to watch the movies. I really want to see They Slash Them. The
yes,
Kevin Bacon
I have not yet watched
movie.
that either.
That's on my list. Hopefully by the time you're hearing this, I've watched that already because I love Kevin Bacon. I love slashers. It sounds like a cool premise.
Kevin Bacon back in summer camp, guys. Like, how can you go wrong?
Full circle. But it's the end of the episode, which means we have to do a question of the week. We do this every episode, and this is the question that was asked all the way back in February in our Discord, and we just haven't covered it yet because I'm not sure. Andrew, I'm not sure we're the experts for this, but this comes from Oculus Neko, who asks, what is your pick for most memorable on-screen kiss in a movie?
Spider-Man. Moving on.
Spider-Man? Yeah. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. The upside down kiss in
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
that's
I remember
I
it.
think the only one. Yeah, I remember that one.
I remember The Matrix,
Yeah.
Keanu coming back with the kiss, but
Yeah, this is not something I think about a lot.
I think the answer is definitively Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's got to be.
All right. Good
Good
Oculus
discussion.
Neko, if you have a pick, I would love to know your
Yeah, by all
most
means.
memorable kiss. Anyone else? Hop into that Discord, baby. There's a link in our show notes. Again, we're going to be watching Halloween Ends the Sunday after that movie comes out, October 16th. So be sure you join so you can watch that with us. Let us know what movie kisses you like. We want to hear it. And just hang out with us and fellow community members as we talk about nerdy things and movies and what have you. So if you're not on Discord at all, if you've never joined a Discord before, it's just an app where you get to talk with people. It's that simple. We would love to have you. Link in the show notes. And also, I'm just going to keep asking you to do things. You know what you could do? I haven't asked this in a while, but I would love it if you could leave a review for our show on Apple Podcasts. If you have an Apple account, that means you can leave a review. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, find our show, give us those 5 stars or however many you think we deserve. Leave a short review on what you like about this podcast, and you can bet we're going to read it on a future episode. We would certainly appreciate that. And lastly, Andrew, I say this during our closing credits every episode, but I think it deserves to get a little bit of attention. Again, I'm just going to keep asking you to do stuff. I would love it if you could share our show with someone that you think would enjoy it. That is the only way we grow. We don't have a marketing budget. We're not running ads everywhere. We're not popping up on different podcast catchers trying to get people to join our show. We just try to make consistent quality content. And so if you know somebody who's into slasher movies, they're going to love this month of our show, I would think. So send them a link. Send them this episode. Say, hey, man. Hey, woman. Hey, person. Check this out. I think you might like it. Andrew, is there anything you want to ask of the people?
Guys, be kind to one another. It's tough out there for everybody, and we're all just doing our best to get by. So do your best. It's all I can ask of you.
Andrew wants you to be a better person. I want to get more downloads for our podcast. And that is our dynamic. That's why we're so fun, Andrew.
Yes. You already made the pitch. I wasn't supposed to add to it.
No, that's good. It's very heartfelt. It makes me look like a total jackass in comparison. I love it. We got to get out of here, Andrew. Just remember, not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for a link for his SoundCloud. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
Well, excuse me again, princess.